Okay, hey, we're doing to another episode of On the Wrist from Off the Cuff to have a really interesting review for you from the brand CADISEN. They're a Chinese budget homage brand founded back in 2013, and these samples were provided by their official AliExpress store. In terms of the types of watches, you can see, of course, a very clear dive watch, some key characteristics and design. When you're looking for a diver, you're going to want water resistant with some type of screw down crown. You're going to want something that's tough, legible with a dive time bezel, and a diver extension is always nice if on bracelet. And now in terms of a traveler's watch, you're going to want, of course, either a GMT or world time function, so you're able to track multiple time zones with relative ease. This is the black sub and meteorite gray GMT. It's kind of a bit of a double feature here, and these are essentially well-spec'd automatic Seiko powered budget alternatives to their famous Rolex counterparts. You can get the sub for sub $100 at $99.99 and the GMT for sub $140 at $139.99. Definitely see links to their official AliExpress store down below in the video description. These are pretty impressive, and although I typically don't shop within this range, I do know that a lot of my viewers and potential viewers are definitely at different places within their collection journey. So I always do like to check in and find out, really how high the bar can be in terms of fit and finish and combination of specs and material at these lower price points from some of these newer brands. So with all that said, let's go ahead, zoom the camera out, get these pieces in hand, and take a closer look. Okay guys, so let's start with, of course, this Submariner homage. Now, the Rolex Sub is, probably one of the most copied watches, whether it be a direct homage type like this or just regular design cues or other watches trying to fill that similar space with just a different design. So it's very popular even in terms of the size. That 40mm size is quite iconic, plus or minus, of course, depending on the eras. But I have to say, as somebody that was pretty heavy into sub homages early on in my collecting career, wow, this is pretty impressive. For under $100, you're getting ceramic, you're getting sapphire, you're getting a magnifier that actually does a good job magnifying. Look at that. That fills up that Cyclops pretty well. I mean, sure, it could be magnifying a little bit more, but I will say this looks pretty darn good in terms of that magnification. Check out the actual size of the date window, then the magnification. That's typically something that looks pretty bad when it doesn't do a good job magnifying, like let's say on an Invicta sub, right, where it just doesn't do enough magnification. It just kind of seems like it's there just to capture the look but not necessarily capture the functionality. Here also, again, for a similar price, you're still going to get that Seiko movement, as well as a ceramic insert, as well as a solid screw in bracelet, which is pretty wild, and these screws in here are flush mounted. So I mean, before we get into the details, let me just show you guys some of the surprising points of quality here. Now, this of course isn't luxury level of brushing or polishing, but it still has everything, and it's not ultra rattly. Like, this is actually pretty well put together, and it has a working glide lock feature, so that moves and it actually works. It's pretty impressive that you can get all of that for the price. And then you look at something like this, and now you're getting a GMT function thanks to Seiko coming out with, of course, this automatic GMT movement. Now they actually are able to add that in, and it still has all of those other kind of points, but where you'll see things where it's going to be a little bit cheaper. Of course, this is not bi-directional. It's pretty much just got a dive time bezel action where you're going to get 120 clicks unidirectional versus a bi-directional there. So it's still going to work and function, but hey, it's again not the most expensive watch ever, although it's meant to look like one of the more expensive mainstream offerings out there. I do wish that they would have just done a standard crown versus doing the destro lefty. And I am a left-handed person, and I just wear my watches on my right wrist, because I just find it just so odd and off-putting to have to use the crown and set everything. I actually will put the watch upside down and kind of set everything. That's how much I really am not a fan of destro crowns. But another thing you'll see is they even kind of imitated that meteorite dial there. And yeah, sure, it's just kind of a pressed dial, so every one of the dials are pretty much going to be the same, versus meteorite where it's going to be individual. But at a glance, it's going to do a pretty good job of rendering that aesthetic. But at the end of the day, it's still, regardless of the material, it's still a very cool texture dial that took some effort, and I think they did do a nice job. It's not ultra fine, but also it's not ultra expensive, so I don't mind that at all. Now, within this space, of course, it's been very competitive for a long time, but before we move any further, 40 millimeter diameter, 12.8 millimeters thick, and that's not including the date magnifier. Of course, it would be a little bit thicker if you do count the Cyclops. As you see that little extra bulge there, 48 millimeters lug to lug. The case is brushed and polished stainless steel. You're getting sapphire with the date magnifier plus an anti-reflective coating there. So this is going to do, of course, when I have it straight on, there's nothing that's going to make that reflection not look like it's there. But hopefully you can get a pretty good idea of how clear this is. Actually, maybe on the lighter dial might be a better idea. You can see that that sapphire crystal does want to disappear, and then you can also see the Rehot signed a bunch of times. Sure, those are Rolex hallmarks, but I mean, at the end of the day, this is for somebody that enjoys the look but may not be at a point in their life where they're wanting to commit, whether they have the funds or don't have the funds, just wanting to commit to wearing, $10,000 on your wrist. So you have something like this, still relatively robust, right? You're going to get 200 meters of water resistance with a screw down crown. That's generally quite good. And I have to say, you start adding those other things, and on paper, this is a really, really strong offering. At the end of the day, though, a lot of folks would just want good specs and something that looks good, so this is that, right? Now the execution, while not bad, it's nothing special. But at the same time, there's a lot of people that don't even care about case finishing. You should see my Citizen Barnacle or Fujitsu reviews and kind of sections where I go on about the lack of quality within the fit and finish, and people just couldn't, and this is for a watch, $600, $700, $800, $900 watch, depending on if you're getting it at full retail or at some type of discount. People would go to bat for why it should be finished poorly and why the grip is okay for it to be polished and soft and shallow and not functional, everything under the sun, because they just like the way that the watch looks. So if you just like the way the watch looks, in this case, that's great, but you also do get a pretty nice build quality here as well. You can see these 3 links, although they're not articulated, neither is the Rolex Oyster bracelet, but the links are individual links. They're solid. They have flush mounted screws, right? There's a lot to like there. These end links are all solid as well. This bezel action is quite good for $100, slightly less than 100, right? Is there any bit of play there? Slightly, but nothing that makes it feel loose or sloppy. This is a very nice functional balance of clicky and smooth. Same goes for this, of course, although it is the same action as the diver, and functionally, it would have been nice to get a 48 click bezel, bidirectional versus unidirectional, just so that you could, let's say, utilize the travel feature a little bit easier and more intuitively. But you're getting a mechanical GMT at under $150. That used to not be a possibility, and now it is, thanks to Seiko. And even those Seiko models do pay a bit of homage in terms of their colorways and everything to Rolex, right? And there's a reason why it's a brand that is so often kind of copied. It's because they have stuff that looks good, is very timeless, and there's really honestly only so many ways you can style a 24-hour scale on a bezel or a 12-hour scale on a dial, right? There's only so many options. So with all this said, let's go ahead, get these pieces on the wrist, set up for, to showcase how they actually wear. Okay guys, as you can see on my 7.5-inch wrist, this wears really quite beautifully. Check that out. Of course, if I do get my wrist a little bit too close to the camera, you're going to get a bit of perspective distortion. So I like to keep my wrist nice and low here, as you can see. And I'll even bring in my other wrist so you guys can take a look at how the diver sits. And then I'll just tighten up the frame here so you guys can, get a nice detailed look, but just with a bit of a truer aspect ratio in terms of how the watch might sit on your own wrist. And although I do have a larger than average wrist at 7.5 inches, it's a relatively round wrist. So it's not like I have this big flat wrist that's a huge canvas for larger watches. You can see it still is really nicely centered again on my wrist. And we can go ahead and do the same for the GMT model. Very nice, really digging the fact that, again, if you're gonna have a Cyclops, at least let it be functional, and it is. And then also the clasp is functional. No, it's not finished to a luxury level. No, it's not even finished to, something comparable within, let's say $500 and up range. But again, these don't cost $500 and up. And in terms of comparing them to what else is in that space at around $100 to $150, these are very, very competitive. So again, these are pretty sweet. And you know what? I don't think you can be disappointed with the cost on these. No, it's not to the level where it feels like unfinished or anything like that. I mean, it's very simply and cleanly finished. There are probably going to be a few things that are going to feel a little bit sharper to the touch around the clasp than you might be used to with something that's more expensive, but it's still completely livable and functional, and there aren't any deal breakers in terms of the fit and finish anywhere within the timepiece. So with all that said, let's actually get these now off the wrist, set up for some loom shots, low light transition, and closing thoughts. Okay, let's go ahead and hit the lights here. And as you can see, very strong performing loom, right? Like, that is pretty darn impressive, guys, I gotta say. Again, functionality wise, these are quite good. Of course, refinement wise, originality wise, that's where you're going to be getting your cost saving. Now, one thing I always like to work in, of course, is a bit of a low light transition, because you're not always going to be out in the middle of a field enjoying direct sunlight. A lot of times you're going to find yourself coming in and out of buildings, walking underneath overhangs, or just hanging out underneath the shade of a tree. So it's nice to see what these colors, textures, and finishes render like in less than optimal lighting. So maybe include some harsh lighting that might expose any types of production defects. But all you're going to see here is just a little bit of fingerprints there and some hand grease from the fact that I'm reviewing this on a warm summer's day here in Oceanside, California. But one thing you'll see also is that even in mixed lighting, this is still quite a legible pair of watches. Again, they get the functionality right, and it probably does help the fact that they're copying some of the most iconic tool and functional watches. Now, these designs aren't luxury by design. They have been known as luxury because of their availability, because of their branding, because of their history, their prestige, their upper levels of fit and finish that go above and beyond what is needed for a tool watch. So with that, you are going to get, of course, some of those aspects here with these models, right? They definitely are designed to be tools. They have, the materials, stainless steel, ceramic, sapphire, a lot of nice feature sets that make them functional pieces. But of course, you're not paying for that extra bit of, let's say, fit and finish, or the material like 904L oyster steel. So that that stuff is very nuanced, and a lot of folks won't appreciate that anyway. They're more so paying more money just for the name. So in that case, you are just buying the watch here. You're missing out on the name. You're missing out on the horological achievements and significances and everything like that. But what you are getting is a close facsimile in terms of the aesthetic paired to a strong spec sheet, right? And there's a lot of folks, I'm not one of them, I don't buy a spec sheet. If the spec sheet is good, that doesn't make it desirable to me. It could have a high spec sheet and a low cost. That doesn't make it desirable to me just because it's good value. I have to want the watch. And the good news is there's plenty of people who want watches like this. That's why there's a huge market. You're still getting 200 meters of water resistance, screw down crowns, 20 millimeter lugs, that beautiful taper that goes from about 20 millimeters down to 15.7, screw pin construction with a flush fit. They're doing those little extra things because they can't make up for the fact that it's a different brand, that these are mass produced, that there is a lot less cost in that level of production, and that these are a lower level of quality. But the crazy thing is that it's high enough to where at this price point, it just makes sense, and you can't really complain about the lack of, luxury level finishes, because you're not approaching any level of luxury cost. So closing thoughts on the wrist, these do wear, of course, surprisingly good in terms of fitting that famous wrist presence of their inspirations. Sure, everything is, a good bit softer, more rounded with wider gaps, but at this price point, it's really to be expected. You're not going to be expecting, just like when you buy an affordable vehicle, from a lesser known brand, you're not going to be expecting it to have the tolerances of a Porsche. When you close the door on the Porsche, right? The gaps and everything like that, those things are going to be a little bit different, and bit of a wider tolerance in terms of quality. In terms of model variations, definitely check the links in the description for options and availability in terms of some different dial options and colorways here. But in terms of comparable models, the market is currently saturated with Rolex Submariner inspired divers, but this combination of specs at the price point are still pretty impressive, even amongst the sea of competitors. Sea of competitors, see what I did there? So for me, guys, the bottom line is not everyone wants to own a Rolex, but many can still choose to enjoy the timeless design aesthetic at these prices. With these specs, it does make it easier and a lot more accessible than ever, pretty much, to just try these pieces out and see if these designs are wearable for you, or maybe you buy one of these and you find out that you never wear it, and it has nothing to do with the branding. It's just maybe the size, maybe the dial, maybe the colorway is just something you find yourself not really wearing. Maybe you find that you would love for this to dress up and something like that to wear to a wedding. You're not going to want to buy, unless it's your wedding, you're not going to buy a Rolex just to wear it one time to a special occasion, right? So there's a lot to think about. And it's not as simple as Swiss good, Chinese bad. So in this case, pretty impressed with these watches in terms of the fit and finish. I will say these are going to be a good amount ahead of those cheaper kind of entry level Timexes, Orients, in terms of kind of mainstream competition. These are going to have better construction, better specs generally. And yeah, I think that's not too bad. that. So yes, I do enjoy, of course, more original designs, but there's a reason why these are so imitated and timeless. So with all that said, let me know what you guys think in the comments below. If you like the video, please hit like, and if you haven't already, please subscribe for more content just like this.